Why does mine have a mop on it? The little black girl asked softly into the microphone, and the entire auditorium stopped clapping. 47 gold trophies glittered beneath the stage lights of St. Clair Academy. Children hugged silver cups to their chests while parents lifted phones to record smiling faces and polished futures. But in Naomi Carter's trembling hands sat a crooked cardboard trophy covered in peeling gold foil, and pinned to the front of her blue dress was a plastic cleaning badge shaped like a gray mop bucket. In the VIP row, billionaire Richard Whitmore slowly rose to his feet. Principal Eleanor Price laughed too quickly into the silence. "It's only a light-hearted joke honoring hard-working families," she said smoothly, reaching toward Naomi's shoulder as if to adjust the badge. But Naomi stepped back before the woman could touch her again. Then the little girl looked down at the fake trophy in her hands and said one more sentence that made the room feel colder. "That's not the one they made for me." 3 hours earlier, before the auditorium went silent and before Richard Whitmore stopped believing what he was seeing, Naomi Carter stood alone near the side entrance of the school gym holding a roll of tape and a stack of folded programs against her chest. The building smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and expensive perfume. Teachers hurried through the hallway carrying clipboards and flower arrangements, while student volunteers taped gold streamers above the doors. Naomi stayed close to the wall so no one would bump into her. She had learned a long time ago how to make herself smaller in places that did not feel built for people like her. At the far end of the hallway, her mother Denise pushed a yellow janitor cart past the trophy table. The wheels squeaked every few feet. "Baby, you eat anything yet?" Denise asked quietly without stopping. Naomi shook her head. "Later." Denise gave her a tired smile and disappeared through the double doors toward the science wing. Naomi watched her mother go, then looked back toward the long table lined with trophies. Each one had a polished gold plaque engraved with a student's name. Sunlight from the high gym windows slid across the metal plates in thin, bright lines. Naomi's eyes moved carefully down the row until she found hers. Academic Excellence Award. Naomi Carter. For just a second, her face softened. Not because she cared about the trophy itself, but because her mother had worked night shifts for 6 months while Naomi stayed awake studying beside the sound of the washing machine in their apartment laundry room. Then someone stepped beside the table. Principal Eleanor Price. "You shouldn't be standing here unsupervised," she said pleasantly. Her smile looked perfect from far away. Up close, it never reached her eyes. Naomi lowered her gaze immediately. "I was just checking the spelling." Eleanor glanced at the trophy. "Well, enjoy the moment while it lasts." Naomi looked up slightly. "Mom." But the principal was already smiling toward a group of wealthy parents entering the gym. Her voice changed instantly, warmer now, polished for donors. "Mr. Whitmore just arrived," someone whispered nearby. Heads turned almost at once. Richard Whitmore entered through the main doors surrounded by school board members in dark suits. Tall, silver-haired, calm in the way rich men became after years of people moving out of their path before they even spoke. Naomi knew his face from newspapers taped to the windows of corner stores. She also knew something no one else in that room knew yet. 2 nights earlier, while helping her mother empty trash bins outside the faculty lounge, she had heard Principal Price laughing softly behind the closed door. "Children from cleaning families should learn gratitude before ambition," the woman had said. Another adult laughed with her. Then came the sound of tape ripping. Naomi's eyes drifted back toward the trophy table. Something was wrong now. Her trophy sat slightly crooked compared to the others. And beneath the bright gym lights, she could see a fresh line of glue still wet along the bottom edge of the gold plaque. Naomi stared at the wet line of glue beneath the plaque without touching it. Around her, teachers crossed the gym carrying folding chairs and boxes of bottled water, while a jazz version of "What a Wonderful World" drifted softly through the ceiling speakers. Nobody else seemed to notice the trophy looked wrong. Or maybe they noticed and decided not to look too closely. Behind Naomi, Principal Eleanor Price's voice floated through the hallway again, warm and polished for donors. "St. Clair believes every child deserves dignity," she said as someone laughed politely beside her. Naomi lowered her eyes. Her fingers tightened around the folded ceremony program until the edges bent inward. Then, very quietly, she slipped one hand beneath the trophy and touched the underside again. The glue was still tacky. Fresh. Somebody had changed it recently. Naomi. She looked up fast. Richard Whitmore stood only a few feet away now, one hand adjusting the cuff of his dark coat while two board members spoke beside him about fundraising numbers and alumni investments. Up close, he looked older than the magazine covers. Not weaker, just tired in the eyes. Naomi immediately stepped back from the table. Sorry, sir. Richard glanced at the trophy in front of her, then toward the principal farther down the hall. You won that. Naomi nodded once. I think so. The answer made him pause. You think so? Naomi opened her mouth, then closed it again. Across the gym, Eleanor Price turned her head slightly toward them. Her smile never moved, but Naomi noticed the woman stopped laughing mid-conversation the second she saw Richard near the trophy table. Then Eleanor started walking toward them, calm, measured, too quickly for someone unconcerned. Mr. Whitmore, she said brightly, I was hoping to speak with you before the ceremony. Richard gave a polite nod. Your student here seems worried about her award. Eleanor's expression softened instantly into professional concern. Oh, sweetheart, is there confusion? She asked Naomi gently. The production staff is still organizing things. Naomi looked at the woman's face carefully. Same pearl earrings. Same soft perfume she had smelled outside the faculty lounge 2 nights earlier while carrying trash bags beside her mother. Principal Price rested one hand lightly on the trophy table. Too lightly, as if covering something without wanting it to look like covering. You should go help your mother now, Eleanor added kindly. The guests are arriving. Naomi didn't move. For one strange second, nobody spoke. Somewhere down the hall, a custodial machine hummed against the tile floors. Richard's phone buzzed softly in his coat pocket, but he ignored it. Then Naomi said, almost in a whisper, the gold plate was different yesterday. Eleanor laughed softly. Honey, trophies get adjusted all the time. No, Naomi replied. Mine had screws before. Richard's eyes shifted downward immediately. Tiny empty marks sat near the corners of the plaque, barely visible beneath the fresh glue. Not decorative marks. Screw holes. Eleanor moved her hand over the bottom edge of the trophy so naturally it almost looked accidental. Children notice the funniest things, she said lightly. Richard didn't answer right away. He only looked at the plaque a little longer than before. Then his phone buzzed again. This time he glanced down briefly at the screen. A text from his assistant. Flight delayed 1 hour. Richard slipped the phone back into his pocket without responding. Excuse me, Eleanor said pleasantly. I need to greet the donors. She touched Naomi lightly on the shoulder as she passed. Not hard enough to seem rude. Just enough pressure to feel like a warning. Naomi watched her walk away through the gym entrance where cameras flashed and wealthy parents greeted one another with practiced smiles. Then Naomi quietly reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out something folded very small. A thin strip of brushed gold metal no bigger than her hand. Richard looked down at it. The engraved words caught the overhead light for just a second. Academic Excellence Award, Naomi Carter. Richard Whitmore did not take the gold plaque from Naomi immediately. He only stared at it for a second too long. The noise of the gym dimming around him as parents filtered through the entrance carrying wrapped bouquets and paper coffee cups. The plaque was heavier than it looked. Real brushed metal. For tiny screw holes sat at each corner where it had once been attached to a proper trophy base. Richard finally lifted his eyes to Naomi. Where did you get this? Naomi glanced toward the gym doors before answering. Behind the stage. When? This morning. Her voice stayed soft, but exact. At 8:12. Richard's brow moved slightly. Most adults barely remembered what they ate for breakfast. You remember the time? Naomi nodded once. Because the hallway clock beeped when I picked it up. She folded her fingers tighter around the edge of her cardigan. I heard somebody coming, so I hid it. Richard looked back down at the plaque. Across the gym floor, Principal Eleanor Price stood near the donor table smiling for photographs beside a banner that read "Building Tomorrow's Leaders." Perfect posture. Perfect pearls. Perfect calm. But when her eyes swept across the room and landed briefly on Richard holding the plaque, her smile disappeared for less than a second before returning again. Small. Fast. Controlled. Richard noticed. Naomi noticed too. She looked in the trash after. Naomi whispered. Richard turned slightly toward her. Who did? Principal Price. You saw that? Naomi nodded. She thought somebody threw it away by mistake. The billionaire's thumb moved slowly across the engraved letters of Naomi's name. Nearby, a catering worker rolled a cart of lemonade glasses across the gym floor while the orchestra rehearsed softly near the stage. Everything still looked normal. That was the unsettling part. Richard crouched slightly so he could speak to Naomi without towering over her. Why didn't you tell your mother? Naomi's eyes dropped instantly. Because she already got one warning. Warning. Naomi hesitated. The sounds of the gym seemed louder suddenly. Folding chairs scraping. Distant laughter. A microphone testing feedback near the stage. Someone put a paper in her cleaning closet last month, Naomi said carefully. It said staff should remember boundaries with scholarship families. Richard's expression hardened almost invisibly. Do you still have it? Naomi shook her head. My mom burned it on the stove. Why? Naomi looked embarrassed for answering. She said papers can disappear if rich people want them to. Richard did not respond immediately. Instead, he slipped the plaque carefully inside the inner pocket of his coat. Not hidden exactly. Protected. Then his phone buzzed once more. This time he answered quietly. Tom. His attorney's voice came through low and efficient. Your assistant said something felt urgent. Richard's eyes remained on Eleanor across the gym. Can school award records be changed same day? Technically? Sure. Why? Richard watched Principal Price laugh at something a donor said, while one hand remained wrapped too tightly around her phone. No reason yet, he said softly. Just checking. He ended the call and slipped the phone away. Naomi stood very still beside him. You don't believe me either, she said quietly. Richard looked at her then. Really looked at her for the first time. There was no panic in her face. No performance. Just the exhausted caution of a child who had already learned what happened when poor people accused important adults of something ugly. I believe you found that plaque, he said carefully. I don't know yet why it was removed. Naomi gave a tiny nod like she had expected that answer. Then her eyes shifted suddenly toward the far side of the gym. There, she whispered. Richard followed her gaze. Principal Price had stepped away from the donors and was speaking sharply to a maintenance worker near the backstage doors. The worker handed her something small and white. Eleanor folded it quickly and slipped it inside her blazer pocket the second she noticed Richard watching. Too fast. Too nervous. Naomi swallowed. That's the paper that was taped to my mom's cleaning cart, she whispered. I know because the corner is ripped. Richard kept his eyes on the folded paper disappearing into Principal Price's blazer pocket long after she walked away. The gym lights reflected softly against the polished floor, while donors drifted toward the front rows with glasses of sparkling water and folded auction brochures. Somewhere near the stage, children practiced smiling for photographs beside towers of gold trophies. Everything looked elegant, expensive, controlled. Naomi stood beside him clutching the sleeve of her cardigan with both hands. You should put the plaque away, she whispered. If somebody sees it missing, they'll know I took it. Richard glanced down at her. You didn't steal your own name. Before Naomi could answer, a man in a navy suit approached quickly from across the gym. Harold Vane, chairman of the school board, mid-60s, silver cufflinks. Smile polished enough to belong on a billboard. Richard, he said warmly, extending a hand, we're about to seat the donor section. His eyes flicked downward toward Naomi for less than a second before returning upward again. And who's this? Naomi straightened slightly. Naomi Carter, sir. Harold nodded politely, though his expression never truly changed. Ah, Denise Carter's daughter. Not Naomi. Denise Carter's daughter. Richard noticed the distinction immediately. Naomi was just showing me something interesting, Richard said calmly. Harold's smile tightened almost invisibly. Children misunderstand things all the time. Naomi lowered her gaze again, but her fingers tightened harder around her cardigan sleeve. Harold leaned slightly closer toward Richard, lowering his voice just enough to sound discreet instead of cruel. Scholarship families can become emotional around events like this. Best not to encourage confusion before a public ceremony. Richard did not answer right away. Across the room, Principal Price had begun speaking with two photographers near the stage curtains, but she kept glancing over every few seconds. I'm capable of deciding what deserves attention, Richard said finally. Harold laughed softly as though smoothing over an awkward misunderstanding. Of course, of course. Then his eyes shifted toward Naomi again. Sweetheart, why don't you go help your mother? Adults are trying to prepare for an important event. Naomi looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. The donor families moved around her in pressed suits and silk dresses, while she stood in faded sneakers beside a janitor's cart parked against the wall. A little blonde boy carrying a trophy glanced at the cleaning badge pinned to Naomi's dress and whispered something to his mother. The woman immediately guided him away without looking directly at Naomi again. Richard saw the movement, saw Naomi notice it too. Still, she did not cry. She only reached into her pocket and wrapped her hand around the hidden plaque inside Richard's coat, as if making sure it still existed somewhere nearby. Sir, Naomi said quietly to Harold. If it was just confusion, why did Principal Price look in the trash cans? Silence flickered across Harold's face for one dangerous second before the smile returned. Children hear fragments and invent stories, he replied smoothly. That's why adults handle complicated matters. Naomi opened her mouth again, but Richard spoke first. Actually, he said lightly, I'd like to see the rehearsal photos from last night. Harold blinked once. Small. Fast. Photos? The setup photos. If the trophy changed accidentally, the pictures should clear that up. Harold adjusted his cufflink slowly. I'm not sure the media team keeps those. Naomi looked up immediately. They do, she said softly. Mrs. Alvarez prints them every year for the memory board. Harold's eyes moved toward her again. This time the smile didn't come back quite right. You seem very interested in staff operations for a child. Naomi swallowed but held his gaze. My mom cleans the offices after everybody leaves. For the first time, Harold's politeness cracked just slightly around the edges. That, he said carefully, is exactly why boundaries exist in institutions like this. Richard's expression cooled. Nearby, the orchestra stopped rehearsing. For a brief second, the gym fell strangely quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning overhead. Then Principal Price crossed the room toward them carrying a silver clipboard against her chest. Good news, she said brightly before anyone spoke. Unfortunately, the rehearsal photo folder was accidentally deleted this morning. Naomi stared at the clipboard in Eleanor's arms. Then her eyes dropped lower toward the woman's hand. A thin streak of fresh gold glitter clung to the side of Principal Price's thumb. The same glitter still flaking off Naomi's cardboard trophy. Richard's eyes settled on the streak of gold glitter clinging to Principal Price's thumb. Tiny, almost invisible beneath the gym lights. But once he saw it, he could not stop seeing it. Eleanor followed his gaze for half a second too long before casually folding both hands over the silver clipboard. Craft decorations, she said with a smooth laugh. The kindergarten volunteers were making banners this morning. Naomi said nothing. She only looked at the woman's hands. Principal Price smiled down at her with the same practiced warmth adults used before closing doors. Naomi, sweetheart, you should really stop worrying about adult matters. Then she turned back toward Richard. I assure you, this entire situation is being exaggerated. Richard gave a polite nod, but his attention had already shifted elsewhere, to the clipboard. A white corner of paper protruded slightly from beneath it, torn at the edge. Same rip Naomi had noticed earlier. Eleanor adjusted the clipboard instantly when she realized he was looking. Too fast again. Nearby, applause suddenly erupted from the auditorium as another donor family entered through the main doors. The orchestra resumed softly. Violin strings floated through the gym while photographers tested camera flashes near the stage backdrop. Wealth wrapped itself around the room like expensive fabric, trying to smother the tension before it could become visible. "Mr. Whitmore," Harold Vane said carefully, stepping between Richard and Naomi without appearing aggressive. "The ceremony begins in 15 minutes. We'd hate for a misunderstanding to distract from the children today." Naomi lowered her eyes immediately when Harold blocked part of her view. Richard noticed that too. "A misunderstanding usually clears itself up with evidence," Richard replied calmly. Harold's smile thinned. "And evidence can look different when frightened children repeat things they overheard out of context." Naomi's fingers tightened around the hem of her sweater. "I didn't repeat it wrong," she said quietly. Nobody answered her right away. That silence hurt more than shouting would have. Principal Price finally crouched slightly so she could speak to Naomi at eye level. Her voice softened almost maternally. "Naomi, sometimes adults make decisions children don't fully understand. The scholarship families especially need to trust the school process. Scholarship families, not students, not children." Richard heard every word choice now. Eleanor reached gently toward Naomi's shoulder again, but Naomi stepped back before the woman touched her. The movement was small, instinctive. Principal Price's smile flickered for just a fraction too long. Then Denise Carter appeared through the side doors, pushing her janitor cart beside stacks of folded cafeteria tables. She froze immediately when she saw the group gathered around Naomi. Fear crossed her face first. Not confusion. Fear. "Naomi?" Denise asked softly. "Baby, what happened?" Naomi looked toward her mother, then toward Richard, then back down at the floor. "Nothing," she whispered quickly. Too quickly. Denise understood at once that meant something terrible had happened. Harold Vane immediately stepped forward with practiced reassurance. "Mrs. Carter, there's no issue here. Your daughter simply became confused about the award setup." Denise's hand tightened around the yellow mop handle until her knuckles whitened beneath the latex gloves. "Naomi doesn't usually confuse things," she said quietly. The room cooled another degree. Richard watched Principal Price carefully now. Watched the tiny shifts, the faster blinking, the way her thumb kept pressing harder against the clipboard edge, the way she still never let anyone see the paper tucked beneath it. Then Naomi moved suddenly. Before any adult could stop her, she reached into the front pocket of her backpack and pulled out a folded envelope sealed inside clear plastic. She held it carefully with both hands like something fragile enough to break if exposed too long to air. "I kept this dry," she whispered. Richard took the envelope slowly. Whitmore Foundation Scholarship Renewal. His own foundation crest stared back at him in dark blue ink. But that was not what made him go still. Stapled behind the scholarship letter was another paper. A disciplinary warning notice from St. Clair Academy dated 2 days earlier. Student conduct concern, Naomi Carter. Reason: behavior likely to damage school image during donor events. Richard read the line twice, then very slowly, lifted his eyes toward Principal Eleanor Price. And for the first time since entering the building that morning, she looked away before he did. Principal Eleanor Price recovered first. "Mr. Whitmore," she said carefully, her voice low enough to avoid drawing attention from the nearby donors. "I think we both understand how damaging misunderstandings can become before major fundraising events." Richard did not answer immediately. He kept holding the disciplinary notice between 2 fingers while the sounds of the gym carried on around them. Camera shutters. Polite laughter. The orchestra warming up again near the stage curtains. Naomi stood beside him so quietly she almost disappeared into the expensive room. But Richard noticed something now he had somehow missed before. The little girl was shaking slightly from hunger, not fear. Denise saw it too. "Naomi?" she whispered softly. "Did you eat lunch?" Naomi shook her head once without looking up. Denise immediately reached into the side pocket of her janitor cart and pulled out a crushed granola bar wrapped in napkins. Here, baby. Naomi took it carefully like something valuable. She broke the bar in half automatically and offered the larger piece to her mother first. Richard watched the movement in silence. Naomi still hadn't asked for anything. Not money, not favors, not revenge. Only for her mother not to lose her job. Harold Vane stepped closer again, lowering his voice. Richard, this is becoming inappropriate. Inappropriate, Richard repeated softly, still reading the warning notice. Student conduct concern. Behavior likely to damage school image during donor events. Dated 48 hours before the ceremony. Before the badge. Before the fake trophy. Meaning someone had already decided Naomi would become a problem before she ever walked onto that stage. Richard folded the paper once and slipped it carefully inside his coat beside the missing plaque. I'd like copies of all award committee records from this week, he said calmly. Eleanor's smile returned too quickly. Of course. Though I should warn you, volunteer paperwork can be disorganized around events like this. I'm sure my legal office can sort through disorganization. The word legal changed the air immediately. Small, invisible, but real. Harold's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Principal Price clasped the clipboard harder against her chest. Denise looked suddenly frightened. Naomi noticed all of it. Please don't tell them my mom helped me keep the papers, she whispered to Richard while the adults exchanged polite smiles sharp enough to cut skin. Richard looked down at her. Why would that matter? Naomi hesitated. Because they already moved her to night cleaning after she asked why my scholarship file disappeared last month. Richard's eyes lifted slowly toward Eleanor. The principal laughed softly at something Harold said, but she was no longer blinking normally. Too fast now. Too often. Richard stepped aside and quietly dialed his attorney again. He walked only a few feet away, near the darkened hallway beside the music room where the crowd noise softened into echoes. Rain had started outside. Tiny drops tapped softly against the high gym windows. Tom, Richard said quietly once the line connected. I need access to internal donor agreements and scholarship review records from St. Clair Academy. Today. Now. What exactly are we looking for? Richard glanced back toward Naomi. She sat on an overturned supply bucket beside her mother's janitor cart, eating half a granola bar in tiny careful bites so crumbs would not fall on her dress. The cleaning badge still hung from the fabric near her collarbone. I'm not sure yet, Richard said, but somebody prepared that child to be humiliated before she ever walked into this room. Silence came through the line for a second. Then Tom spoke lower. Do you think it's targeted? Richard looked toward the stage where Principal Price was now greeting wealthy parents beside a giant banner about leadership and integrity. I think, Richard said slowly, they already knew exactly what they were going to do to her. He ended the call and slipped the phone away. Then something small caught his attention near the janitor cart. A white sticker partially peeled from one of Denise's cleaning supply boxes. Property of St. Clair Records Storage. Richard stared at it. Denise noticed too late and quickly turned the box around. But not before he saw a second label beneath it. Scholarship Files, Archive Disposal. Richard kept his expression neutral as Denise slowly turned the storage box away from view. The orchestra began playing again inside the auditorium, soft strings drifting through the hallway, while donors took their seats beneath the gold stage lights. Everything about the school still looked polished from the outside. That, Richard realized, was part of the design. Mrs. Carter, he said quietly, why are archive disposal boxes in janitorial storage? Denise froze beside the cart. Her eyes moved instinctively toward Principal Price across the gym floor before returning downward again. I'm not supposed to talk about office materials, she said carefully. Richard noticed Naomi watching her mother more than anyone else in the room. Not worried about herself. Worried Denise might say too much. Harold Vane stepped closer immediately. Richard, I really think we should move this conversation elsewhere before the ceremony starts. No, Naomi said softly before Richard could answer. The word surprised all of them because she almost never interrupted adults. Harold looked down at her with practiced patience. Excuse me, Naomi swallowed once. If people only talk in private, then everybody changes their story later. Silence settled over the group for a second. Nearby, a microphone screeched briefly on stage before cutting out again. Richard watched Harold carefully now. The man smiled, but one finger had started tapping rapidly against his cufflink. Tiny. Nervous. Naomi, Principal Price said gently as she approached again. You're upset. That's understandable. But creating scenes like this only hurts your mother. Denise flinched slightly at the sentence. Richard saw it. Naomi saw it too. My mom didn't do anything wrong, Naomi said quietly. Then help her by calming down, Eleanor replied smoothly. Richard reached into his coat pocket and removed the scholarship warning notice again. He unfolded it slowly while watching Principal Price's face instead of the paper. You mentioned earlier this was standard procedure, he said mildly. Yes. Then there should be dozens of notices like this for donor events. There are policies for all students. Richard nodded once. Good. Then you won't mind showing me similar notices issued to non-scholarship families. For the first time, Eleanor hesitated before answering. Barely half a second. But enough. Harold stepped in quickly. Student records are confidential. Mine wasn't confidential, Naomi whispered. Everyone looked at her. Naomi lowered her eyes again. The secretary read it out loud when she gave it to Principal Price. Richard's gaze shifted sharply toward Eleanor. In front of other staff? Eleanor smiled too quickly. Surely we aren't treating overheard office chatter as evidence now. Richard said nothing. Instead, he slowly crouched beside the janitor cart. His hand rested lightly against the archive disposal box Denise had tried to hide. May I? Denise looked terrified to answer. Naomi looked at her mother for one long second, then gave the smallest nod. Denise stepped aside. Richard opened the lid carefully. Inside sat shredded folders, old scholarship applications, donor correspondence, and stacks of student files marked inactive. Most had already been run through partial disposal. But one manila folder near the top remained untouched. Naomi reached toward it before any adult moved. That one wasn't there yesterday, she said softly. Harold's head turned too fast toward the box. Richard noticed immediately. Naomi handed him the folder. The tab read, Carter, Naomi, review status. Richard opened it slowly. Inside sat Naomi's scholarship essay, attendance records, grade reports, and a printed email clipped to the front. Subject line, recommendation before ceremony. The sender name made Richard's stomach tighten slightly. Harold Vane. The message was only one sentence long. Remove public recognition. Keep her visible but not equal. Nobody spoke. Somewhere behind them, the auditorium lights dimmed to announce the ceremony was beginning. Then a phone vibrated sharply inside Principal Price's blazer pocket. Eleanor grabbed for it instantly, but not before Richard saw the notification flash across the screen. Security office. Camera archive restored. The vibration inside Principal Price's blazer seemed louder than the orchestra now swelling inside the auditorium. Eleanor turned sharply away from the group, already reaching for the phone, but Richard moved first. Not aggressively, calmly. Principal Price, he said, and something in his voice made her stop walking. Parents were filing into their seats now beneath chandeliers of white string lights hanging over the gym floor. Children adjusted graduation ribbons and trophy sashes while teachers guided rows into place. The ceremony was seconds from beginning. Yet the small circle near the janitor cart had gone completely still. You said the rehearsal files were deleted, Richard said quietly. Eleanor kept the phone hidden in her palm. That's what I was told. Then why would security notify you the archive was restored? Harold Vane stepped forward immediately. Richard, this is absurd. We're discussing internal technical errors in the middle of a school function. Naomi looked toward the stage curtains. The cameras save automatically every night at 2, she whispered. Nobody answered her at first. Richard turned slowly toward her. How do you know that? Because my mom cleans around the security office, Naomi said. The guard complains when the backup sound wakes him up. Eleanor's composure slipped again. Tiny, but visible now. Naomi, she said sharply. You should not be listening outside offices. Naomi lowered her eyes. I wasn't outside. The little girl pointed toward the janitor hallway. The door was open. Richard watched Principal Price carefully as she realized Naomi was no longer simply guessing things. Harold gave Eleanor a warning look almost too subtle to notice. Then Richard held out his hand calmly toward the phone. May I? Eleanor hesitated 1 second too long before surrendering it. Richard read the notification silently. Security office. Camera archive restored. 2 AM files recovered. Attached below sat a preview thumbnail from the hallway outside the trophy storage room. Eleanor reached toward the phone instinctively. That footage won't prove anything. Richard looked at her. Interesting sentence. Silence spread through the group. Nearby, applause erupted as another student was announced on stage. Nobody in the hallway moved. Richard opened the security archive. A loading wheel spun slowly across the screen. Harold folded his arms tightly. Denise Carter stood frozen beside the janitor cart with one gloved hand covering her mouth. Naomi watched the loading wheel without blinking. Then the footage appeared. Grainy black and white hallway video.
Timestamp 2:13 AM.
Trophy storage room corridor. Principal Eleanor Price entered carrying a cardboard box under one arm. Harold Vane followed behind her. Richard felt something cold move slowly through his chest. The footage had no audio, but it did not need any. Eleanor unlocked the trophy room herself. Harold held the door. Minutes later, they emerged again. Eleanor carried a single gold plaque in one hand. Harold carried the cardboard trophy. Then another figure appeared briefly at the edge of the frame. Naomi, small, half hidden behind the hallway corner near the janitor closet, holding a trash bag almost bigger than her body. Richard's breath caught slightly. She had seen everything. On screen, Eleanor noticed movement near the corner. Her head snapped sharply toward Naomi's hiding place. The footage froze for half a second from buffering, then resumed. Harold stepped directly in front of the security camera, deliberately, blocking the view for exactly 7 seconds. When the hallway became visible again, the plaque was gone. Richard stared at the screen without speaking. Naomi's voice came quietly beside him. That's when she told me some children should stay grateful instead of proud. Denise closed her eyes. Harold immediately straightened. This proves nothing except routine adjustments before an event. Richard still said nothing. He only kept watching the footage replay silently. Eleanor opening the trophy room. Harold blocking the camera. Naomi hiding near the janitor closet with a trash bag in her hands like she already knew nobody would believe her if she stepped forward. Richard suddenly realized something much worse than the badge itself. This had not been spontaneous cruelty. Had been planned carefully enough to require timing, access codes, deleted files, and coordinated silence. Under his name, inside a school his foundation publicly praised every year. He removed his glasses slowly and rubbed one hand across his mouth. When he finally looked back up, the warmth had disappeared completely from his face. Then he handed the phone calmly to his attorney, who had just arrived at the gym doors. Preserve every file, Richard said quietly, and call my legal team. The ceremony never truly recovered after Richard Whitmore spoke those 6 words. Preserve every file, and call my legal team. The orchestra stopped first. Then the parents near the front rows slowly lowered their phones one by one as whispers spread through the auditorium beneath the hanging lights. Principal Eleanor Price stood perfectly still beside the stage curtains, but the color had drained from her face now. Harold Vane attempted one last controlled smile. Richard, let's not create unnecessary spectacle in front of children. Richard turned toward him calmly. You already did that. The sentence landed harder because he never raised his voice. Within 20 minutes, the school's legal counsel arrived. Then 2 additional board members. Then district representatives after Richard's attorney quietly forwarded the security footage and archived emails. Nobody escorted Naomi or Denise out anymore. Nobody told them to wait elsewhere. For the first time all day, people were moving around them carefully instead of through them. Denise sat in a folding chair near the back hallway clutching a paper cup of untouched coffee, while Naomi leaned quietly against her shoulder. The cleaning badge still hung from Naomi's dress. Richard noticed it from across the room and walked toward them slowly. "May I?" he asked softly. Naomi looked down at the badge for a second before nodding once. Richard removed it carefully from the fabric without breaking the pin. The tiny plastic mop bucket swung slightly in his hand beneath the fluorescent lights. Such a small object. Such an ugly amount of intention behind it. Across the auditorium, raised voices finally broke through the polished calm. One board member demanded to know why scholarship files had been marked for disposal. Another asked why donor communications contained language about maintaining visible hierarchy. Harold Vane tried to frame the emails as internal wording errors, but the footage had already destroyed the lie, especially the part where he blocked the camera himself. Principal Price resigned before sunset, officially for failure of leadership, unofficially because the board attorneys understood exactly what public litigation involving race, scholarship discrimination, and donor fraud would do to St. Clair Academy. Harold Vane was removed from the board pending investigation before the evening ended. Richard watched all of it quietly from the hallway outside the auditorium while rain streaked softly against the high windows. He felt less victorious than ashamed. Ashamed that his foundation logo sat on banners throughout the school while a child carrying his scholarship had been taught to stand still and accept humiliation under his own name. Later that night, long after the parents had gone home and the photographers disappeared, Richard walked back onto the empty stage. The gold trophies still reflected the dim overhead lights. Naomi stood near the front row holding the real academic excellence trophy now restored with its original plaque. Denise remained near the janitor cart, uncertain whether she was allowed to stand there without cleaning something. Richard stepped off the stage and crossed the polished floor toward her instead. "Mrs. Carter," he said quietly, "how long have you worked here?" Denise looked startled by the question. 8 years. "And how many times did they make you enter through the service hallway during donor events?" Denise's silence answered him before her voice did. Richard nodded slowly once, like a man finally admitting something he should have understood long ago. "That ends tonight." 2 weeks later, Denise Carter became a full-time facilities supervisor for the Whitmore Foundation with triple her previous salary, healthcare, and legal protection attached to her contract. Naomi's scholarship was permanently secured under independent oversight. No school administrator could alter a loan again. St. Clair Academy publicly corrected her records, issued a formal apology before the district board, and created a protected scholarship review system monitored externally by Civil Rights Council. But the moment Richard remembered most did not happen in courtrooms or meetings. It happened close to midnight in a quiet diner 3 blocks from the school after everything was finally over. Rain tapped softly against the windows while Naomi sat across from him wearing an oversized new winter coat Denise clearly could not stop touching every few seconds. A plate of pancakes rested in front of the little girl beside a full glass of milk she hadn't needed to split with anyone. Richard looked at the cardboard trophy sitting beside the booth wall where Naomi had placed it carefully instead of throwing it away. "You kept that?" he asked gently. Naomi nodded while tracing one finger across the bent gold foil. "I wanted proof," she said softly. Richard looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Then Naomi added the sentence that stayed with him long after the rain stopped and the diner lights dimmed for closing. "People only started listening when somebody important finally looked at the same thing I did."